Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk about a game that caught my attention called Dusk Diver 2. It came out in February 2022 on Steam and just recently on consoles. The hack and slash gameplay and art style is what piqued my interest. To me it looked kinda like it had elements of games I enjoyed like Astral Chain, Persona, and Akiba's Trip. Dusk Diver 2 is a decent anime style hack and slash RPG type game. The characters look pretty good. I think the real-life urban Taiwanese setting is interesting, and how certain gameplay elements are integrated into it. And the gameplay has different elements to it that make fights more than just button mashing, but not too complicated. Plus, it's nice how you can change between characters in a fight, all which have different fighting styles, attacks, and abilities. And while not being the game's focus, a bit of fan service can be found here and there. Of course, we'll also cover some things I'm not too excited about, like for example how the game handles newcomers who haven't played the first game, graphical shortcomings especially on the Switch, and other things like that. I did mention before Taiwan is the setting. The game is made by a Taiwanese developer called Wanin International. Idea Factory was kind enough to send me the PS5, PS4, and Nintendo Switch versions of the game. I was also sent some cool goodies, as well as the launch edition of Dusk Diver 2, so we'll take a look at that a little bit later. Just so you know, you're going to see the PS5 version most of the time here, unless marked otherwise. And of course, there will be a comparison of the different versions there. The story follows Yumo, a college student who, along with several allies, fights interdimensional invaders who attack Shimanding, a district in Taiwan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Shimanding is often called the Shibuya of Taiwan, so just to kind of give you an idea of what that district is like. The story is a continuation of the first game, which I didn't play. Supposedly you don't have to, but I felt a little bit out of the loop at first. Despite the summary you get at the beginning, terms get thrown at you and characters aren't introduced that well. They're just talking to each other like they know each other because, well, they do. And then you're just kind of there, I don't know what's going on. But a little bit into the game, you start understanding things a little bit more. You get the gist of it. For people who skip cutscenes, it's business as usual, and you can play the game with complete ignorance of the plot like you do with everything else you play. Overall, I don't find the plot uninteresting, but I think the whole recapping of the previous game's story could have been done better. While the overall plot is serious, the characters often have humorous encounters or amusing conversations, so it never feels, like super gravely serious. Dusk Diver 2 features hack and slash gameplay, like I mentioned. The game takes place in Taipei, and therefore has a very urban look. There are other interdimensional places that look more distorted, sci-fi, or just generally have a different look to the regular overworld, and that's usually where you fight enemies. In fights, you have the usual light and hard attacks. You can also log on to enemies and cycle through them with the right analog stick. Additionally, you can also jump and dodge. There are special abilities you can use in fights, which are activated by pressing the R1 button, and then one of the face buttons. What I like is that you don't really have to monitor your meters that much. Let's say if a special attack doesn't work, it usually will after you get a few more hits in. Hitting enemies repeatedly with special attacks and harder hits can put them into a break state, which allows you to do a special attack by clicking both L1 and R1 or L and R on the Switch. Usually that's accompanied by a little animation. That deals extra damage, so it's a good thing to make use of if there's lots of enemies to deal with or if you're battling a stronger opponent. There's a burst mode, which powers up the character, as you might imagine. By attacking in this mode, you'll notice a percentage go up on the left. When it hits 180%, not sure why that number specifically, then you can unleash a very big attack. Just be careful to position yourself correctly, just so you don't waste it. I've done that before. Dodging is just that. Try to make use of it whenever you can, of course. It works in a similar way as it does to, like if you've played Nier Automata, as in you're invincible when you dodge. Something to look out for is the glowing red effect enemies emit when they're about to make a bigger attack. If you parry it correctly, it'll knock them down. I sometimes don't get the timing correctly. I can never remember if it's, just as the red light comes up or if it's just when you're about to get hit. It does mention it in the tutorial and you can look it up, but yeah, even now I forgot. Something that's nice is that you have 4 different characters to switch between in fights. Yumo is the default, and I'm sure many people will settle with her since you use her right in the beginning. Easy to use and fast is a good summary. Leo is slower, but deals more damage. I don't use him that much except in some fights, like boss fights, just to deal some heavy damage. Liviata is my favorite for a couple of reasons. Other than bestowing us with side boob, I like the fact that she fights from farther away with her guns. That's usually my kind of fighting style when it comes to these games. Gives you a bit of a breather, and then, you don't get tossed into the fight so much with so many characters, where you can then be attacked from the sides. Behet is good at aerial type combat, but I usually stay on the ground, and even there he's quite strong and fast. A good alternative to use in tougher fights. They also all have different status ailments, so that's another thing to take into consideration when you're fighting. Though I found out that usually doesn't matter too much in most fights, though something you might want to make use of in boss fights. Personally, I usually stay with Liviata most of the time and then switch to a different character just for a bit of variation, or when my health runs low, because I can't remember how to parry those attacks. You can also use items to restore health and other things, as well as revive characters. You collect experience after fights. Each character has their own pool of XP, and you have to go into the menus and level up characters manually. So in other words, you have to distribute the XP to various stats. I never felt that the game was really all that difficult, so I just leveled up whenever I noticed enemies starting to get a little more difficult. It does seem like it's possible to overlevel your characters, because in the overworld you'll see like this dark aura, around a lot of people. So if you do all those fights, I can imagine you could be quite overpowered. There are side quests you can do, which I recommend. They seem to take place wherever you're going on the main quest anyway, or at least they are on the way. It never seemed like a hassle, but at the same time, I wish side quests were a bit more substantial and separate. Sometimes you just want to take a break from the main quest, right? I do like that the side quests allow you to interact with some of the other characters more, so you can get to know them a bit better. I already mentioned that I thought the enemies aren't that difficult. That being said, the game isn't a total button masher. Usually there's enough enemies around that you have to be wary of ones off to the side, so you have to reposition and dodge quite often. Boss enemies have an extra layer of difficulty because you have to do a guard break type thing before you can really deal damage on them. And when their guard is up, they don't fall down like regular enemies, so you can't just knock them down easily, so you have to jump around and do things like that until, of course, you get rid of the guard thing. One thing that's kind of cool is that you can get some stat boosts by eating at several restaurants around the city. It adds a little bit of an immersive factor. Your base of operations is Tuma's Market, a convenience store, which is where you can save, change character outfits, buy items, and things like that. And your allies are hanging out there too. Dungeons also feature checkpoints allowing you to save and make use of functions available at Tuma's Market. So, about the graphics. Dusk Diver 2 looks decent when you look at the characters. Clearly, they went with a cel-shaded look, which is these days quite common, but what I don't quite understand is why the environments don't have that look. Specifically the urban setting, because, there's kind of contrast there. It all looks a bit PS3 spec in my opinion, which is too bad considering the fact that the characters and enemies look a step above their environments. Pedestrians are also super simplified. I guess they tried to stylize them in order to not be so resource intensive, but it doesn't look that great. At least in the sci-fi bits, the contrast isn't too bad. The outlandish appearance helps, but a bit more extra detail would have been welcome. Things like the menus and user interface actually look really nice. I think the graphic design is well done overall, and the character profiles and sprites look very nice too. I'm sure people will cite similarities with Persona, but I think Dusk Diver looks and feels much more like Akiba's Trip, Undead and Undressed. I've reviewed that game a long time ago, but the similarities are uncanny. There's the urban setting, of course, ragtag bunch of protagonists, to use a cliché term for a cliché situation, the comic book style menus, high contrast color scheme. Even the normal people or pedestrians have that really simplified placeholder style model when they're far away. I thought that was a very specific similarity. Even the story has a similar tone in how the characters interact and how serious and lighthearted moments are handled. Let's address the differences between the PS4, PS5, and Nintendo Switch versions of Dusk Diver 2. As expected, the PS5 game looks the best and runs at almost a constant 60 frames per second. Certain special attacks combined with a moderate amount of enemies brings in some noticeable decrease in frame rates here and there. The PS4 version isn't that far behind, but obviously it doesn't go above 1080p in terms of resolution, And while still targeting 60 FPS, it doesn't really run at that frame rate during normal battle or even just when you're running around town. The Switch version looks noticeably worse. It's very pixely, the textures are very low res, and the worst part is all the dithering. There's a lot of it. The opening sequence cutscene bombards you with it. A lot of Switch games suffer from this, like budget games, but this is so much more than you usually see, and it's not a great look. The Switch game targets 30 FPS and, interestingly enough, doesn't really feel that much worse to play than the other two versions. I think it's a bit like Astral Chain in that regard. The gameplay was created with that frame rate in mind, so I never felt that the lower frame rate made the game harder to play, even though I started with the PS5 version on purpose, because you really feel the differences once once everything gets stripped away. I'd imagine the PC version would be around the PS4 or PS5 mark, depending obviously on the components that the computer has, but I don't have that version, so I recommend checking out some gameplay footage. In terms of sound, I think the game is adequate. Hits are perhaps not the most satisfying in the world. I think some of the effects in battle are a bit grating after a while. When it comes to sound, I think Dusk Diver 2 is much better in the music department. I really like the mixture of metal and electronic music. A lot of the songs that have guitar in them have a strong djent influence, which I guess isn't that uncommon these days. I still remember when that was a relatively underground genre and people considered it a Meshuggah ripoff. Nowadays people think of Doom when they hear djent, which I still think is weird. I can't remember what it was, but there was one song that had the usual djent sound. And then we were like, oh my god, it sounds like Doom. It's like, no, it doesn't. That's not where that originally came from. Anyways, overall I think there's a good amount of exciting songs that fit the gameplay very well. I'll talk about the soundtrack a bit more once we do the unboxing portion. There's 2 dubs available, by the way, which are Japanese and Chinese, and the Japanese dub is the default, at least in the the versions we get in the West here. There's no English dub available. Alright, now onto the physical stuff. Idea Factory was nice enough to send me a press kit, which itself includes the launch edition of Dusk Diver 2, which we'll get to. It may not be obvious, but this thing is supposed to look like a Tumas Mart takeout thingy. The top flaps are just kind of weird looking here, but basically it's just like that because of how it was shipped. I really like it when companies take something from a game and make it real. It's kind of like a fun immersive thing. The paper/cardboard is sturdier than a takeout box would be in real life. Inside there was lots of food and food related items, some sort of corn snack, noodles, and things like that. Tumas Mart branded items like chopsticks, napkins, mints, and even a soup bowl, which was pretty cool. The shirt is something, by the way, you can buy at the Idea Factory store if you're curious there. Now, onto the launch edition, which I suppose counts as a limited edition to some degree. This one happens to be of the PS4 version, but the PS5 and Switch versions look the same and have the same stuff in them. I quite like the character design and also the art style. I think the colors pop well and the image looks exciting. Very suitable for an action type game. The back isn't too cluttered either. Very easy to make that look awful. But here even the screenshots are big enough and I think it's all quite good. Inside is the game, an art book, which is softcover by the way, and then a jewel case that houses the CD for the soundtrack. The art book is softcover, I just said that, and is of pretty decent quality. Some concept art and illustrations, but there's no words or anything, so yeah, there's nothing written about the creative process, which I think is a bit disappointing. The soundtrack has some cool art on it. I think the choice of illustrations are nice, and so are the colors. In terms of music, I already mentioned that I like the genres. It's mixed typically hot as you'd expect, brick walling galore, except for some of the quieter songs. And you can see with those, it's all normalized, so all the peaks hit at, 0 decibels. It actually makes them sound so much louder than the loud songs, because the volumes are not adjusted, in the context of the album. It's, anyways. Somebody said they're like, oh, nobody cares about this stuff, but hey, guess what? I care about this stuff, and I make the video, so if I want to talk about mastering of the soundtrack, I'm going to do that. Another thing is that unfortunately the mix can sometimes sound a bit congested when guitars and heavy drumming are involved. And I don't think that's necessarily the fault of the brick walling. It's more like there's too much going on in the lower mid-range. I think they could have achieved some more clarity there if they managed to kind of isolate the instruments better, on the spectrum. The game has a reversible cover sleeve, the difference here being that the regular front has nerfed outfits. The other side shows how the outfits look like in the game. This is the same for the PS5 and Switch versions too, in case you're wondering. The box art, by the way, shows the more covered up outfits, presumably because it actually sits in store shelves. Overall, not a bad little package, not too super original items, but hey, what do you do when, it's not a huge box? But overall, the quality is good and everything is housed in an actual package, which you can't say for some, other LEs that I've seen. But it would have been nice if the actual box had a different cover on it. It's always nice when a special edition has some different artwork going on than just the regular one. So yeah, that's my review of Dusk Diver 2. I thought the game was a good effort. Interesting art style, some fun battle mechanics that keep it from just being a button masher, very fitting music, moderately cultured character designs are some of the highlights. I just wish the Switch version looked and performed a little bit better, though I'm surprised that the lack of performance doesn't really hinder gameplay that much. My recommendation is to check it out, especially if there's a sale on the platform of your choice. It's definitely not a AAA game, so don't expect that sort of refinement, but if you keep in mind that it is a budget game, and if you want, something just a little bit different, then definitely check that out. That's that. I hope you enjoyed checking out the review. I have a second channel with arguably more cultured content, so check that out in the description or in the top right in the cards. Thank you to all the Patreon members, some of which you can see here on the screen now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.